Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to be doing a deep dive on a mother and daughter power and legacy.
Sounds intense.
Yeah, should be pretty good. We're talking about Anne Boleyn and her daughter, Queen Elizabeth I.
Oh, yeah, that's a really intriguing relationship, isn't it? Especially when you think about it. Elizabeth I inherited her mother's legacy, but Anne was executed when she was just 2 years old.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And to help us unravel this complex relationship, we're going to be using insights from Dr. Tracy Borman.
Oh, yeah, she's great.
She's a leading expert on the Tudors.
She really does bring that whole era to life.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that she emphasizes is how royal births were so different back then.
Okay.
So just imagine like a birthing chamber.
Okay.
But it's not a serene hospital room.
No.
It's this stifling space with covered windows and roaring fires, even in August.
Oh, my gosh. It sounds more like a torture chamber than a place to give birth.
Right, all about ritual and tradition.
Oh, wow.
But even in this environment, Anne asserted her own will.
Really?
She insisted on breastfeeding Elizabeth.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It was unconventional for a queen at the time.
Very much so.
Wow. So it seems like she was determined to be involved in her daughter's upbringing, even defying those royal protocols.
Yes, very much so. And I think that's something that we see in Elizabeth later on.
Yeah, you think that independent streak we see in Elizabeth was influenced by Anne, even at a young age?
It's definitely possible, I think.
Interesting.
Especially because even though Elizabeth was sent to her own household at 3 months old, which was pretty typical for the time,
Okay.
Anne remained very involved in her life.
Oh, wow.
She handpicked Elizabeth's caregivers,
Oh, wow.
many of whom were Boleyn relatives.
So making sure that she was surrounded by people loyal to Anne.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So she would be surrounded by people loyal to Anne and to Anne's values.
Wow. So it's like she was creating a protective bubble around her,
Very much so.
even from a distance.
Yes.
That's so interesting. And she didn't stop at just staffing the household, right?
Oh, not at all.
Those lavish gifts that Anne showered upon Elizabeth, those weren't just tokens of affection.
No, they were a constant reminder to Elizabeth of her mother's presence.
A way to stay connected even when they were apart.
Exactly. Oh, that's so sweet.
And Anne was also really strategic.
Oh, okay. How so?
In shaping Elizabeth's education,
Okay.
she appointed Matthew Parker as Elizabeth's chaplain.
And who was he?
He was a staunch religious reformer.
Oh, wow. So that was a bold move considering all the religious turmoil at the time.
Absolutely.
Oh.
And it's almost as if she was planting the seeds for the religious reforms that would later define Elizabeth's reign.
Wow, wouldn't that be something? What a legacy.
Right. And speaking of historical mysteries, Dr. Borman mentions this very curious detail.
Oh, really? Tell me.
There was speculation that Anne may have been pregnant again in 1534.
Really? I've never heard that before.
Yeah, it's something that was never confirmed.
Okay.
But the rumors alone just add another layer of intrigue to her story.
I can imagine.
It makes you think, like, what if she had given birth to a healthy son?
Oh my God.
How would things have unfolded?
History would be totally different. Right.
I wonder if she would have even survived.
You never know.
Oh my gosh. It's just crazy how history is full of all those what-ifs.
It really is.
But as we know, Anne's fate took a tragic turn, and it's so hard to even imagine what young Elizabeth must have gone through when her mother was executed.
Yeah, it's a heartbreaking story for sure.
It is, but
Yeah.
what's remarkable is that despite the trauma of losing her mother and, being declared illegitimate,
Right.
Elizabeth still found that strength and that resilience to go on.
Yes, and she wasn't entirely alone during all of that.
You're talking about Mary, right?
Yeah.
Henry VIII's eldest daughter.
Exactly.
It's surprising to hear that she acted as kind of a positive maternal figure for Elizabeth,
It is, isn't it?
especially considering the animosity between Anne and Mary.
Yeah, it kind of speaks to Mary's character, though. I think
Yeah.
she could have easily harbored all this resentment towards Elizabeth, but it really does seem like she cared for her younger half-sister.
Okay, so at least during Henry VIII's reign.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, that is so interesting. It really is a testament to the complexities of family dynamics, especially in the Tudor court, where, personal feelings and political maneuvering were always kind of intertwined.
For sure.
But even with Mary's presence, I can only imagine the impact of Anne's execution on Elizabeth. I mean, did she outwardly express her grief? Or did she keep those feelings more hidden?
It seems like even as a young girl, Elizabeth was very, very careful.
Oh, okay.
But there are these subtle hints that she was already starting to honor her mother's memory.
Oh, really?
There's this famous family of Henry VIII portrait from 1545,
Okay.
and Elizabeth is depicted wearing a pendant with a very prominent A on it.
Why do you think that was a tribute to Anne?
Some historians believe that it was a subtle act of defiance.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible. It's like she was sending a secret message,
Mm-hmm.
you know. My mother may be gone, but she's not forgotten.
Right. Wow.
I'm also curious about the other side of that coin.
What do you mean?
Was there any pressure from Henry VIII to keep Anne's memory alive?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Or was he trying to, like, totally erase her from history?
Right. Well, there are some theories
Okay.
that suggest that that pendant that we were talking about with the A
Okay.
might have been orchestrated by Henry himself,
Wow.
maybe as a way to acknowledge Elizabeth's legitimacy or even manipulate public perception.
Wow, that's a really fascinating historical puzzle.
It really is.
It really makes you think. And it leads us to another big moment in Elizabeth's life, her imprisonment in the Tower of London during Mary's reign.
Right.
Can you imagine the psychological toll of that? Being confined in the very rooms where your mother was held before her execution.
It must have been just absolutely harrowing.
Yeah.
It's just this really chilling reminder of how history can sometimes repeat itself even within families.
It's true. But even in that moment of fear and uncertainty, it seems like Elizabeth's connection to her mother remained very strong.
Yes, it did. And she continued to surround herself with people who had ties to Anne.
Oh, wow. So it's like she was drawing strength from those connections,
Yes.
keeping her mother's memory alive, even when it was dangerous to do so.
Absolutely.
Wow. What happened when Elizabeth finally ascended to the throne?
Right. So
Did she openly embrace her mother's legacy, or did she have to be a little bit more careful?
she had to be very careful.
Okay.
So upon becoming queen, Elizabeth had to navigate this really delicate political landscape.
I can imagine.
So she didn't immediately repeal the acts that declared her illegitimate, but she found other subtle ways to honor Anne
Okay.
through her actions rather than grand pronouncements.
I see. So this checkers ring that Dr. Borman talks about,
Yes.
that seems like a perfect example of that approach.
Right. It's like a secret code,
Yeah.
a way to carry her mother with her without, risking open rebellion.
That's incredible.
On the surface, it's just this simple ring with Elizabeth's initials.
Okay.
But if you open it, there are these hidden portraits of Anne and Elizabeth.
Wow.
It's so powerful.
Yeah.
This symbol of Elizabeth's private grief and devotion to her mother.
Wow, what a poignant object. And it really highlights the challenges that Elizabeth faced as queen, balancing her personal feelings with the political realities of her reign.
For sure.
So how did that balance play out as Elizabeth's reign progressed?
Yeah.
Did she become more confident in honoring her mother as time went on?
That's what we'll be exploring in the next part of our deep dive.
Oh, can't wait.
We're going to look at how she navigated the complexities of her mother's legacy
Okay.
and how her actions ultimately shaped both her reign and the memory of Anne Boleyn.
I'm excited for that.
Mm.
Okay, so we're back and ready to continue our deep dive into this fascinating relationship between Anne Boleyn and Elizabeth I.
It's so interesting.
Before we move on to Elizabeth as queen,
Right.
I'm kind of curious about something we touched on earlier.
Yeah.
You had mentioned that Anne appointed a staunch religious reformer,
Yes.
Matthew Parker, as Elizabeth's chaplain.
Mm-hmm.
That seems like a really forward-thinking move, considering the religious climate at the time.
Absolutely. It really was. And it underscores her commitment to religious reform.
Oh, okay.
I mean, this was a time of immense upheaval in the church.
True. Yeah.
Henry VIII's break from Rome and the establishment of the Church of England were still very recent.
Oh, yeah.
So it was a very precarious time.
So by appointing Parker, she was essentially aligning Elizabeth with the reformist camp.
Yes, exactly.
Wow, that's so fascinating to consider what the long-term implications of that were.
Right.
I mean, Parker would go on to become Elizabeth's first Archbishop of Canterbury.
Right. A pivotal figure in shaping the Elizabethan religious settlement.
Wow, so that's quite the ripple effect.
Huge.
It really shows how even seemingly small decisions can have such major consequences down the line.
Definitely. And it shows how much Anne was invested in not just Elizabeth's well-being, but also in the future of England.
Right, because she cared about her daughter so much, and she wanted to make sure that she was set up
Exactly.
with the best possible future and to have the best possible impact on England. And let's not forget that Anne herself was the one who challenged the status quo.
Right.
She was the first Queen Consort of England to be crowned in her own right.
It's incredible when you think about it.
Yeah, that's a truly groundbreaking achievement. I
Yeah.
feel like it's easy to overlook that in the shadow of her tragic end,
Right.
but she was a true trailblazer,
Yeah.
breaking down barriers and setting a precedent for female leadership.
Absolutely.
Do you think that Elizabeth drew inspiration from her mother's example? I mean, both women faced immense challenges as female rulers in a patriarchal society.
Yeah, it's hard to say for certain, but it's certainly plausible.
Yeah.
Elizabeth would have witnessed firsthand the challenges that her mother faced and the opposition that she encountered from those who were just clinging to traditional gender roles.
Right. And maybe seeing Anne navigate those waters kind of gave Elizabeth a blueprint
Maybe.
for how to assert her own authority as queen.
Exactly. And she may have inherited her father's shrewdness, but I think there's a clear echo of Anne's boldness in her approach to leadership.
Yeah, I agree. It really makes you wonder what Anne would have thought of Elizabeth's reign.
Right.
Would
Yeah.
she have been proud? But I guess we'll never know.
Sadly not.
And history doesn't give us all the answers, does it?
No, it doesn't.
What we can do is analyze the choices that Elizabeth made
Yeah.
and the way she navigated her complex inheritance.
Absolutely.
And one aspect that is particularly intriguing is her relationship with Mary.
Yeah.
We talked about how Mary showed some kindness to Elizabeth during Henry VIII's reign,
Right.
but how did that dynamic shift when Mary became queen?
Yeah, things definitely became more complicated. Even
Yeah.
though she showed some initial warmth towards Elizabeth,
Yeah.
their relationship became strained as the religious tensions escalated.
Right, because religion was such a powder keg in Tudor England,
Absolutely, it was.
and it really drove a wedge between the two sisters.
Right. Mary, a devout Catholic,
Yes.
was determined to restore Catholicism as the state religion,
Right.
while Elizabeth's Protestant leanings just made her very suspect in Mary's eyes.
Right. And it's amazing how religion could both unite and divide families.
Yes. Yeah.
Even at the highest levels of power.
It's true. And it reminds us that these historical figures were real people
Yes.
grappling with real emotions and personal beliefs.
Yeah. And those personal beliefs often clashed with political expediency.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
For example, even though Elizabeth was declared illegitimate during Mary's reign,
Right.
she chose not to challenge the act of supremacy.
I mean, that seems like a pretty pragmatic decision considering how much danger she was in.
Yeah, it was a calculated move, for sure.
Yeah.
A way for her to just avoid further conflict and just secure her position.
It shows her shrewd understanding of the political landscape
Yeah, it does.
and that sometimes survival requires compromise.
Absolutely.
It's like she was playing the long game, you know,
Yeah.
biding her time until she could fully embrace her own beliefs and vision for England.
Precisely. And those political instincts,
Yeah.
that ability to strategically navigate a complex and often treacherous court, those are qualities that echo both her father and her mother.
It's true. It's like she inherited the best and maybe learned from the worst of both her parents.
Maybe so.
But speaking of Anne,
Yes.
I'm curious about the extent to which her influence extended beyond religion and politics.
Okay.
Did Anne's love of fashion and courtly culture rub off on Elizabeth at all?
Most definitely.
Oh, wow.
Remember all those lavish gifts that she showered upon young Elizabeth?
I do.
While that love of finery stayed with her,
Oh, wow.
Elizabeth became renowned for her elaborate gowns and her love of jewels and just opulent courtly displays.
It sounds like she was channeling her mother's spirit, you know,
Yeah, she would.
embracing those elements of courtly culture that Anne herself had championed.
Exactly. And that extended to their shared love of courtly love.
Oh, interesting.
Both Anne and Elizabeth enjoyed the attention of male admirers and navigated that delicate dance of courtly romance.
It's fascinating to see those parallels.
It is.
But of course, Elizabeth also had to learn from her mother's mistakes. We know that Anne's downfall was partly due to her enemies at court,
Right.
and they used her romantic entanglements against her.
Absolutely. And that's a crucial point.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, while enjoying the flirtation and intrigue of courtly love, was much more cautious.
Oh, okay.
She never allowed herself to become too attached or vulnerable,
Right.
always keeping a firm grip on the reins of power.
So it's like she was taking a page from her mother's playbook,
Right.
but adding in her own strategic twist.
Exactly.
She learned that in the Tudor court, love could be a weapon,
For sure.
and she was determined not to be disarmed.
And that leads us to one of the most enduring mysteries surrounding Elizabeth.
Oh, and what's that?
Her decision to remain unmarried.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Was it a personal choice? Or was it influenced by her mother's fate?
It's a good question.
Some historians believe that Anne's execution played a role in shaping Elizabeth's determination to never surrender her power to a husband.
I mean, it's a compelling theory.
Right.
After all, Elizabeth famously declared that she was married to England.
Yes.
Perhaps she saw firsthand the dangers of allowing a husband to usurp a queen's authority.
It's possible. And it's worth noting that Elizabeth, despite her unmarried status, cultivated a very powerful image of femininity.
Right.
She embraced the symbolism of virginity, associating herself with the Virgin Mary and projecting this aura of purity and strength.
It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it?
It is.
She was a queen who embraced her femininity,
Mm-hmm.
but also refused to be defined by traditional expectations of marriage and motherhood.
Right. She was forging her own path.
Yeah, just as her mother had done.
Exactly. And that brings us to the ways in which Elizabeth actively shaped the public perception of her mother.
Okay,
So we've talked about subtle gestures like the checkers ring,
right.
but there were also more overt acts of commemoration.
Like what?
Well, like the portraits of Anne that started to appear during Elizabeth's reign.
Oh, right, yeah.
These weren't just random occurrences. It seems likely that Elizabeth had a hand in commissioning or at least encouraging the circulation of these images.
Wow.
It was a way to rehabilitate her mother's reputation and to counter all that negative propaganda that had been spread by Anne's enemies.
It's like she was reclaiming her mother's story
Absolutely.
and presenting Anne not as a traitor, but as a woman of grace and intelligence.
Exactly. And it wasn't just portraits.
Right.
What about all those emblems that are associated with Anne?
Like the falcon and the armillary sphere.
Yes, those started appearing more frequently during Elizabeth's reign as well.
Wow. They were like subtle reminders of Anne's influence woven into the fabric of courtly life.
Absolutely. It's incredible how she used these visual cues,
Yeah.
these subtle symbols, to keep her mother's memory alive.
And those symbols even extended to Elizabeth's own self-presentation.
How so?
She often wore pearls, which were associated with both purity and Anne Boleyn.
That's right. And she chose to be crowned with the same crown that Anne had worn.
Wow.
A very powerful visual link between mother and daughter.
Wow, those are powerful details.
Right.
It's like she was saying, I am my mother's daughter,
Yes,
and I will not let her be forgotten.
exactly. And that brings us to the final years of Elizabeth's reign,
Okay.
a time when her authority was just unassailable.
And what happened then?
Well, what's fascinating is that as Elizabeth got older,
Mm-hmm.
she seemed to become more comfortable with openly acknowledging her mother's influence.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if as she got older and more secure, she just felt more comfortable, you know?
That's an interesting thought. It's possible that as a young queen with all those threats, she had to be so cautious.
Right.
But as her power grew, maybe she felt freer to express those personal feelings.
Right. And one of the most intriguing possibilities from this later period is that she may have commissioned a biography of Anne.
Oh, yeah, that is a fascinating idea.
There's no concrete evidence.
No,
But
but it wouldn't be out of character for her.
no, not at all.
She would want her mother's story told, and maybe from a more sympathetic perspective than what we got during Henry's reign.
Right. It'd be a way to make sure that Anne's legacy was shaped by those who loved her, not by her enemies.
Exactly. A final act of love.
Yeah.
Give Anne a voice even in death.
It speaks to a broader theme that we've been talking about this whole time,
Was that?
that Elizabeth embraced and redefined her mother's legacy.
Right.
She learned from Anne's triumphs and her tragedies.
Yes.
And took inspiration from her boldness while also being mindful of the dangers.
It's like she was carrying a torch for her mother, but forging her own path,
Yeah.
blending Anne's spirit with her own style of leadership.
Right. Yeah, it's incredible.
It is.
It really is remarkable.
When we look back on Elizabeth's reign,
Yeah.
that era of cultural flourishing and national strength,
Yeah.
you can't help but see those echoes of Anne's influence.
So in a way, Elizabeth's reign is kind of a vindication of Anne's vision for England.
Right.
It's almost poetic.
It
A
is.
sort of delayed triumph for Anne through her daughter's achievements.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it. It really highlights a point that we often forget in history.
I'd say.
It's not just dates and battles and politics.
Right.
It's the human stories,
Yes.
personal connections, the legacies.
It's about people.
It is.
It's about their relationships
Exactly.
and how those things shape the world.
Yes. And Anne and Elizabeth's story is just a perfect example of that.
Absolutely.
Full of drama and tragedy,
Yeah.
but ultimately triumph.
And their story continues to resonate with us today.
Centuries later.
Right. It's a reminder that history is not just something that happened in the past.
Yeah.
It's alive. It's relevant.
It's full of lessons.
Yeah. And we can apply those to our own lives.
Absolutely. And that's what makes doing these deep dives so rewarding.
I agree.
It's not just dusty old facts.
No.
It's this vibrant tapestry woven with real human stories,
Yeah.
emotions, and ideas that still shape who we are today.
I love that. Well said.
Mm,
And we want to leave you with one final thought. We've examined how Elizabeth honored her mother's memory,
right.
both publicly and privately.
Yes.
But what do you think Anne would have made of her daughter's reign?
That's the question, isn't it?
Would she have been proud of the Queen Elizabeth became?
I think Anne would have been just filled with pride and awe
Yeah.
to see her daughter, who had endured so much hardship, rise to become one of the most iconic monarchs in English history.
Right.
It's a testament to Anne's own strength and resilience
Yeah.
and the enduring power of their bond.
It's a beautiful image to end on a mother's legacy living on through her daughter, shaping a nation and inspiring generations to come. And that wraps up our deep dive into this incredible story of Anne Boleyn and Queen Elizabeth I.
I loved it.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the fascinating world of history.